Hello listeners and welcome to this week's episode of the Cult Vault. I am excited to bring you the start of this month's coverage on the Unification Church, also commonly known as the Moonies, a movement of charismatic leaders, titans of industry, mass weddings and strange blood lineage doctrines. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a special and warm welcome to the newest patrons and supporters of the show, Amanda and Rochelle. A huge welcome to you both. I hope you will be happy here as part of the group and enjoy access to exclusive monthly content. Thank you so much for supporting my show. You can also find your names on the supporters section of my brand new website, cultvaultpodcast.com. Now, without further ado, here is my interview with Teddy Hose, a long-time spokesperson against the Unification Church and someone whose media presence I have referenced a number of times in this podcast. Hi, Teddy, and thank you so much for joining me today. We are diving further into the subject that is the Unification Church, and I know that you are a fierce advocate when it comes to shedding light on what the heart of this religion really looks like. So, would you like to start by introducing yourself to our listeners?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Teddy Hose, and I am, let's see. Oh, wow. Where do I start? Yeah, I guess I'll start by saying I have been, I grew up in the Unification Church, which is led by Sun Myung Moon, who believes he's like the second coming of Jesus. And so I grew up in Tarrytown, New York, where his family has his estate. And we grew up in one of the houses that the church is owned there until I was 13. And then we moved to Seattle, and I moved around a bit after that. Now I live in New York. And just about maybe a decade ago, I kind of decided that I'm a writer and an artist. So I decided that I should talk about my upbringing. Like, that's something interesting. It took me a long time to realize, like, maybe I should talk about that, and that would be interesting. Like, to me, it was normal. So yeah, that's what I do. And by day, I just do, like, I'm a designer, like a motion graphics person. That's kind of a sum up.
And I was just mentioning to yourself before we hit record that I've been watching you talk about your upbringing on various platforms. I've referenced quite a lot of the appearances you've made in things like the Cults and Extreme Beliefs documentary. There's the explained episode on cults that's available on Netflix and YouTube that I referenced you on in my very first episode.
Wow.
When I was talking about what is a cult, just explaining sort of the etymology of the word and things like that. So my roots are all tied up in this episode. So it feels like this is really exciting for me to be able to have this discussion today. And I just know you're going to give the listeners some insight that we haven't had yet, even though I have previously covered the Unification Church. So if anybody wants to go back and to listen to those episodes, they're also really interesting, but this one's going to be fantastic. So for those who might be unsure what the Unification Church is, who Sun Myung Moon is there a way that you could briefly summarize the practices and beliefs of the Unification Church?
Sure. Yeah. Sun Myung Moon, he believed himself to be, he died in 2012, but he believed himself to be the second coming of Jesus. He's originally from what is now North Korea, Busan. And it was there in his teen years. He had that revelation. And ever since then, he's just kind of preached his own gospel. He gained a following in Korea. And then there's some, I don't know the full story, but there were some ties with like the Korean CIA or something where he was being an influential person. And I think there's these theories, or like there's some research about how they turned him into an agenda to get, I guess, maybe to empower their nation or something, or try to take over other countries or something like that. Anyway, Sun Myung Moon moved to America in the late 50s. I believe it was 1957. to, spread his unification movement. And, that was kind of, it was getting into the hippie era. So that's where like my parents joined in the 60s. Yeah. And it just kind of, it spread around in America when, like the Beatles had like, the, what was it? They found their guru, and some cult experts say that they credit that as like what made the 70s all about this, big guru craze of like people were consciously looking for that. So Sun Myung Moon was there at the right time, and but who he really was, and this is from a book I read called Change of Blood Lineage and Ritual Sex in the Unification Church. He had these kind of bizarre sexual. He believed he had sexual powers, and that like there was a purification if you had sex with him. So, and this was actually kind of a thing in Korean shamanism at the time. So, he came in under the guise of this conservative, like Christian figure, but really, there was weird sex stuff in the church, and that some of that is actually coming out. And a lot of other cults have this too, all these stories of people coming out and talking about strange sexual abuse. And so I'm only starting to see that now. But that's, I guess, to give you a sum up. And he also made a lot of money. We grew up going to these really fancy properties, but it was all from exploited money from labor trafficking from people who got witnessed into the church and convinced that, working constantly for the church was like the best thing they could do for God. It was, legit thought reform or brainwashing. So I grew up in a family that, we eventually left, but I guess I'll get to that later. But that's to try to sum up. Yeah.
So he in the clips I've watched, Sun Myung Moon does come across as having those characteristics of a charismatic leader, right. And I think that I actually read about some of the sexual ritualistic stuff, and it was, I think, is it called the Picarium doctrine or something similar to? Yeah,
Picarium, I think that's how it's pronounced. Yeah.
So it's something to do with Sun Myung Moon can cleanse your womb through sexual intercourse, which is really strange because in the actual principles of the Unification Church, it's all about becoming pure through marriage, because sex before marriage is impure. So it feels very hypocritical in that sense. And I was very surprised when I read about all the infidelity that Sun Myung Moon has been accused of, but I'm sure that's also something we'll get into a little bit later as well. So I'm sure you can summarize it a bit better than I can, what the belief system is of the church itself.
Sure. The belief system is if someone gets, well, it's based on the Christian, the Christian doctrine of Adam and Eve. They sinned in the Garden of Eden, and from there, that's where humanity sprung. And so, the world is sinful. But the Unification Church believes that they had Eve had sex with Satan and then had sex with Adam. And so that's where the evil blood lineage came from. And so Sun Myung, Jesus was supposed to cleanse all of us of that, but according to the Unification Church, he failed because he got crucified. So, whereas I guess maybe most Christians say oh, that's a great holy act, but Sun Myung Moon thought he was supposed to have a family and live on until he died and purify humanity. So Sun Myung Moon claimed that he was taking on that mission, probably hundreds, maybe thousands of other cult leaders out there. So somehow Sun Myung Moon got ahead. And so when you get pulled into the church, when you have children in the church, they are born with pure blood. So that's the agenda. We're only allowed to marry people who also come from the Unification Church with the pure blood, quote unquote. So they were very strict about that. Was one of the heaviest, things in the church, is like, don't have sex outside of marriage to another second generation. So that's pretty much, the basis of it right there.
So Moon is telling the world that anybody that is born outside of the church is born with sin, just straight away. You're just a newborn baby and you're born with sin straight away. And he's trying to finish what Jesus started and create God's kind of perfect earth by marrying everybody together himself.
Mm-hmm.
So in order for me to become pure, I have to be in one of these marriages, and kind of, I know that Moon died in 2012, but he would be there to conduct this ceremony, and then any of the children that I would have with that husband inside of the Unification Church, that baby would be born without sin and be born pure.
Mm-hmm.
That's
right. Yeah.
What does Moon claim? Like, how does he claim to have the ability to cleanse people of their sins just through kind of these processes of marriage and things like that? Has he claimed to be sort of like a Messiah, or kind of a chosen disciple of Jesus or God?
Yes, so basically, now we're getting into weird, bizarre sex stuff. There was something called holy wine. So this was believed to be the cleansing, if you drank it, then you would be cleansed of, I guess it was kind of like something that would help you birth someone who was cleansed of original sin. So the myth, the story, no one knows yet if this is totally true, but a lot of people have stories, but is that, with Sun Myung Moon believing he had sexual powers, supposedly his ejaculate is in the wine. And, at least in the early days, I know it's awful. In the early days, it was like that. And I think what they do is they pour the wine into like a bigger pool of wine or something like that. And then it basically eventually, there's no trace of it. But yeah, that was the way you were supposed to be cleansed.
I have not heard about that. So that's really, at least there's like a physical, I mean, that's disgusting and a really like hard to think about, that if that's actually what happened, but at least there's actually a physical explanation on how he expected this to happen, and wasn't just saying sort of, I'm Jesus reborn, and I have the power to cleanse you all through mass wedding ceremonies.
Yeah, at some point it went into candy, or maybe they were manufacturing candy that maybe had holy wine in it or something. Yeah, people would go door to door and give people candy, or like they would have a little thing of grape juice that they'd pour for people door to door and be like, drink this. And it's like, who are you? Like, I mean, of course, there was a
strange.
It's all symbolic. I think the church just kind of, the more the church like loses power or whatever, the more they change the rules to try to keep the power. So they'll be like, okay, it's symbolic now. Or, even the pure blood lineage, they were like, okay, there's a forgiveness ceremony if you had sex before marriage. Like, they're just like, come on, just stick around. Like, who knows if they'll eventually accept gay people, because it's like an anti-gay church, unfortunately, so yeah, I don't know how far they're going to keep compromising.
Oh, it sounds very similar to, I did some coverage on Aum Shinrikyo, and I talked a lot about how the indoctrination process worked with that movement. And Shoko Asahara would apparently get people to drink sort of this concoction that had his blood in it. So they would store vials of his blood, and there would be a drop in sort of the chalice that you drink from in the initiation process. So I'd never heard of semen, though. That's a new one for me. Yeah, I was surprised about that. I don't know. Am I surprised? I am. I'm shocked, but I don't know if I'm surprised. But you mentioned before that your parents joined in the 60s. So were they already, did they know each other at this point, or did they meet sort of in that with through their church involvement?
They met through their church involvement. Yeah, one big thing I forgot to mention is, the Unification Church is known for its mass weddings. So in the stadiums, if you see that in any kind of encyclopedia or like online, that's the one. So yeah, my parents, it's kind of interesting actually. They were of the first flock of Unification Church members. So they were like respected as like elderly or older members. And, so I think we had some privileges from that. I'll admit that. We kind of grew up in like a pretty nice house in Tarrytown, New York, until my parents left the church when I was a teenager. But so they met in San Francisco. My dad had just moved down there from Seattle. He was a hippie, and he was, looking for himself and trying to be an artist. And he was doing okay, actually. He was kind of in the right circles, like close to like Janis Joplin and West Wilson.
Wow.
Psychedelic posters. Yeah. So like he was hanging out and like living in the same spaces as like these people. And until he met God, so yeah, some Korean woman walked in and, witnessed to him one day. But my mom is from Japan, so I'm half Japanese. She was the really determined one in her family, and she wanted to go to a good school and like find God and everything. And she just got, I guess, sent to America to help with the effort here. And they worked at the same church center. And, you would think that there would be arranged marriages back then more, but it sounded like in the earliest days, like my mom kind of chose my dad. Like she actually proposed to him. Like she wears the pants in the family. That's just kind of precedence. Yeah. So like and then I heard other couples also kind of picked each other, and they just asked their leader if it was okay, like their local church leader, if it was okay. And like, so I was like, I guess it wasn't always matching, but so that's how they met. And then
wow, she sounds like such a strong-headed woman, your mum.
I actually you probably watched Wild Wild Country?
Yes. Yeah. I actually just watched that about a week ago.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, I really like that documentary because it really showed all the aspects. It wasn't just like cult bad. It was like people are emotionally invested in this.
Yeah, I completely agree. I watched the first episode, and it was it was Sheila talking about her perspective. And then I was thinking, okay, so the second episode is going to be from the perspective of all the people that think it's really bad, but it didn't go that way. It just kind of carried on taking snippets from all angles. So yeah, I agree with what you've just said. But who would you compare her to from that documentary?
So my mom is kind of, I think, on par with Sheila. Like there's like an old church archive site, T Parents. It means like true parents. That's what we called Reverend and Mrs. Moon. tparents.org, and there's old archives of her speeches, and it's just like, it's so depressing to read. It's just, she was so deep into it. Like, when you're feeling bad or something, or you feel like you're not enough, just think, what would true father do? Basically, like, just like, but she, being kind of a strong-headed woman, and she's smart. My mom's very smart. I think she maybe more than my dad. I don't know. I think maybe both of them just eventually left the church. They just were like, this isn't what we signed up for. It was really hard, but they did. But yeah, she is. I think there's a few Sheilas in the Unification Church, but my mom was definitely one of them. She was like, I'm going to be loyal, like super loyal. And that's kind of a Japanese thing too. This is extreme loyalty to where, like, you do seppuku or, kamikaze, like it's like you die for the cause,
Yeah.
So that's good for some things, but other things, man.
I think that's so interesting, because when I watched that documentary, I almost thought that Sheila was I almost could have, if I would have dipped in and out I would have come in and said that she's the charismatic leader of that movement.
Yeah, I tell people, I'm like, that documentary is about Sheila. Like, they hardly ever show anything about
The
Osho.
whole
Yeah.
thing was about her from the start to the finish. Um, yeah, the way she speaks is extremely charismatic. I was sat there thinking I could listen to you all day, and then I was like, "That is that a good thing? I don't know if that's a good thing, but that's how these things work, isn't it?"
Sorry, I don't know if you can hear this, but I'm in an old, like century-old building, and there's a radiator that's like gurgling right now.
No,
Can
I
you?
can't hear it. If anyone else can hear it though, then at least we know
Okay.
what it is. It's not me with a hungry belly.
Okay.
So, um, when your parents meet, they get married with permission from the leader. Everyone's okay with it. Your mum proposed to your dad, which I think is awesome considering how many years ago that was as well. And it seems to be more of a common thing in this day and age, more so back then. So that's awesome. And how many children did they go on to have? How are you an only child, or are there brothers and sisters?
I actually have four siblings in my immediate family, but and this could be its own podcast episode. One of my biological siblings was given away to another family, and that's a common thing in the Unification Church, like because it's all one big family, like one big, like, it's trust circle. If someone can't have a baby, then sometimes a family will give one of theirs to that family. It's called offering child. So there are offering children, and and this person, anyway, it's kind of a long story, but yeah, she didn't know until she was a teenager, and yeah, and now she like lives around my family, getting to know us. We kind of come from different uh, scenarios, so different kinds of families. Like her mom was like a very powerful person in the church, and ours, we left the church. So there was a lot of negotiation kind of in integrating her into the family. But now I think now things are pretty good, and we pretty much see her as like almost like extended family kind of.
And did you know growing up that there was a sibling who was kind of somewhere else?
I had heard about it here and there, but I guess until I was maybe in my teen years, and then people started talking about it more. And I went to a workshop and I saw her, and she said she kind of had a crush on me. So I was like, oh no.
Oh
I
my
knew, but she
goodness.
didn't. Yeah. Huh?
I just said, oh my goodness, that's so, and that probably comes from like misplaced because she felt something familiar towards you, which just turned out to be that you're
Yeah.
brother and sister. So that's really interesting.
It's kind of a common thing I heard of in families where someone's adopted, like the reunion experience is like it's so emotionally, it's such a big thing. Or yeah, maybe there's that similar resonance, and then because you feel like you're not related to them, maybe it turns into that. I don't know, but
Are these
um,
things like monitored though? Because if two people meet each other and then get married and then have children, is there no like that could have happened with the two of you? Like, is there a way to? I don't I don't know. That's a bit weird to think about, isn't it?
well, yeah, I think in this, usually the kid knows that they're adopted, but I
Right.
think this particular mom, actually, I read this about cults. There's this one cult researcher or expert who's also a therapist named Roseanne Henry, and she had a similar situation, but she had like someone in the cult that she was in. Uh, she coerced basically her to give her daughter to the leader person, and the leader person like excommunicated them and didn't want the daughter to know that she was part of another family. That's kind of what happened with our family. Like it was like don't ask, don't tell, and we were all afraid of my biological sister's mom, of her finding out and like being like don't screw it up. So when I read about it, I was like, oh my God, this is a pattern. And anyway, it was interesting.
That is really interesting. I mean, already in such a short time, you've given me so many new pieces of information that I didn't know about, and I thought I'd done extensive research on the Unification Church. So this is just so fascinating for me. So you grew up with yourself and three siblings, and you had one sister who was living with another family.
Yeah, we grew up in New York till I was 13, then Seattle or Bellevue, right outside Seattle. And the whole time, my biological sister was in Berkeley, California. That was like another kind of church kind of hub. Yeah, where a lot of people got, my parents got witnessed to in San Francisco, which is right across the bridge from Berkeley. So, yeah.
Would you say that New York was the prime hub of activity for the Unification Church?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, for sure. That's where the Moons live. That they own this building called the New Yorker Hotel. They still own it. And I think Wyndham, I think it's called, hotels, they use it, but I think it's still like properly owned by the Moonies. So, or the Moons. So yeah, we would go there during church holidays. The church had its own holidays like Parents' Day, and they called New Year's God's Day. And we would, yeah, we actually, that was one of the perks of growing up in the church. You go to this prestigious building and you're like, wow, this is like ours. Like, and the kids just played around in all these, in the grand ballroom. And like, we were just kids, like going to these different floors with these ornate, like gold furnishing, it's totally just like this palace, but it was all just a huge facade, built on exploited money. And like, we didn't own any of it. We were just people who were working for the church. So, I don't know. It was fun to go to the city on weekends or stuff, or I mean, on church holidays just for that. But yeah, that was our lives. Like, and then we go to school and just like try to hide the fact that we were Moonies because we lived in that town. So,
okay. So
yeah.
did you access public school?
Yes, we did. The way I describe Unification Church a lot is like, it's kind of like Scientology where it's trying to like get in with pop culture. So it, at least in my family, I think it varies between families, but in my family, like they were a little loose about, getting into this or that show or music. I mean, my parents had some restrictions, but like, yeah, we tried to keep up with things to be like marketable to like people.
So the aim behind that is that you can go to school and witness to people almost about sort of the
Yeah.
the religion and the things that you're involved in. Not just you specifically, but I mean just being integrated with the general public.
Yeah, I mean the way it worked is like in that, like, just north of New York City where the Moons lived and where a lot of church family lived around them. It was more than witnessing, because like everyone knew the Moons were in that area. It was more like we just had to hide that we were in the Moonies because we were all afraid that our teachers were gonna call us out or something like that. It was actually a really, I grew up with a lot of anxiety and distrust of it. Today it's turned into some social anxiety. Thank God I went to college and I drank a little and I made friends, and, I learned how to trust the world a little more. But before that, yeah, just going to school near the Moons was just, all you had was each other. So it was like, it made you bond even more within the church and trust the church even more. So yeah, that's just kind of how life was like there. But yeah, when I went to the West Coast, when we moved to Seattle, the church leader there was like, he talked about something called like natural style witnessing, where basically it's like all your friends are potential recruits. And I actually, by that time, I was kind of pissed off and I was like, no, man, I'm not going to do that. Like, screw that. Like, I have a life and I don't want to freaking, I mean, I said it in a polite way, but yeah, no thanks.
So it's interesting what you just said about becoming closer to each other, because a lot of I've spoken to a few ex Jehovah's Witnesses, and they've said that, some of them have said, I've been homeschooled because my parents didn't want me to be interacting with worldly people, which I say in inverted commas, such as myself. I'm a nice worldly person. And so they're homeschooled and they are almost isolated from things like pop culture. But then you're going to public school, and because of the anxiety that came with your identification with the church, that the sort of level of control is still there because you're bonding more with the members of the Unification Church in fear of being kind of outed in schools, so that the effect is still the same. You're not being restricted from interacting with worldly people, but because of the worries that come attached with those interactions, you're still not interacting with worldly people.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that's the thing in quite a bit of cults. Even like some of the LGBTQ kids who grew up in the church, they said like going to church, like summer workshops, which is basically like Bible camp, or going to church events, was like an escape from their own families, where they felt like they were invisible or just, didn't exist pretty much, or had to hide who they were. So, and those bonds are still going to this day. Like a lot of people kept their friends, because I think almost everyone I know who grew up in the church just left. They were like, you go to college, and I think the church, they want us to go to good colleges and stuff, so that I think it's like a status thing for them. But what they don't realize is that we learn like things that are totally against what the church stands for. So we all get smart and we all make friends with people, and we don't have to come back home to our parents and have to like, behave for them. And it just, people, that's kind of like where people take off. And I forgot where I was going now, but yeah.
And when you speak about your parents marrying and having the kind of the leader's blessing, and then you're living in a house that's owned by the Unification Church, how does that gap get filled? How do your parents kind of receive extra responsibility within the church to kind of move up the ranks, so to speak, and become closer to the inner circle?
Well, we almost never saw my dad growing up. He was, sometimes I call the Unification Church the Church of Bad Dads, because like it's everyone, in a lot of cults, a lot of the men will try to, if it's a male leader, which usually it is, they'll try to emulate the leader. And the leader is this, he's just this guy who's totally full of himself, and he thinks he's saving the world. And I've never seen him be really a father. Like it's always just been like self-promotion. Like you don't see or hear about, he talks about love and everything. But so, my dad, he, one time I actually interviewed him for some personal project I was working on. And I was like, what was your childhood like? This is the first time I've ever heard him talk about his childhood. And he was like, well, I got passed around a lot, because my mom was too poor. And I was like, oh, like, so passed around between like aunts and uncles? And he was like, no, my mom would find like classifieds in the paper, and I would just get passed around as like a foster child until I was 9. So I was like, that explains so much, because he just had no radar or like signal of being a father. He just, I don't know, that's the thing. But it was actually really good to know that, because I just didn't know. I was just angry. I was like, you didn't raise us really. You just you provided for us through this church, and then you expect that like you get to be our dad. Like, no, mm-hmm. Or, to act like nothing's wrong. My dad was just gone a lot, and my mom sometimes my mom grew up in a more kind of stable family in Japan, and she stuck around a little bit more. And when she did get asked to go on these missions, like in other countries, to, hold workshops to witness to people and stuff, she was a little more hesitant, or, she would talk to us and be like, I'm sorry, I have to leave, for a few weeks. And I remember like my sister was crying, or, my mom was the more stable presence. So, we had like church caretakers for like 2 or 3 years at a time. We had a different person. It was almost like at-home daycare. So it was very communal in that way. But yeah, my parents, like, it wasn't until I went to a proper therapist I learned like predictability with parents is really important, and it's gonna hurt your sense of trust in relationships if you don't have that. And I'm like, well, there it is, like something I'm working on. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I've read some of your work where you mentioned when both parents would have to go and work away, and you would kind of be passed from to different caretakers. So it's unfortunate that your father grew up so poor that he had to be passed around, but then you grew up with a father that had so much responsibility that even though you lived in a nice house in a nice area and were provided for, the same thing almost happened despite the difference in financial stability.
Right. Yeah.
But did your father have to do this traveling because they were both so strong-headed that they worked their way up through the ranks of the church to be given this extra responsibility?
Yeah, I think my mom was more like that. I personally, I think that my mom maybe has issues with her own father. She would tell me about her own father here or there. Once she mentioned that he just was like, he was this guy who came home, and this is in Japan. And in Japan, I think the mom, I read a New York Times article actually, like not too long ago. It talks about how the mom is just expected to run the home and to take care of the kids. And the dad just goes to work and comes home. And that's his role. So I think there was that playing into it too. Where was I going with that? Yeah, my mom just, I think she was the one who was more pushing him up the ranks. And I imagine also because he was an artist and he spoke a certain way, he's very charismatic. He sounds like a very humble person. He's very unassuming, my dad, and to a fault. It's gotten them into some like issues with door-to-door marketing and stuff. My mom always has to chime in. Now he just hands the phone to her and she's just like, no. But yeah, again, she's like the Sheila. But I think, yeah, she was just like steering that ship. And my dad was like the lead singer and she was like the producer, like making everything happen. So yeah, he was the face and she was the brain. Yeah.
And did your father spend one-to-one time with Sun Myung Moon? Is that how far up he managed to get at one point or another?
Yeah, I heard that they would have like dinners with him sometimes and talk about, the different plans they had. Like my parents were in it. They wanted to make the world like a better place. Like I think some people joined because of like the power and the money and whatever, but and I think for my mom and dad, what they had with that is security. So there was power and money. So they did have like a place where they could feel really empowered. And that's where I can't really hold it against them because they both came from poor families. So, no, my dad was, his title was managing director at the World Mission Department. So this is with, one of Moon's cronies was Reverend Kwok, who, so my dad worked for him and he's like, yeah, he's one of the big heads who has like this, beautiful mansion in Terrytown and, not too far from the Moon's estate. And he worked directly with him. And my dad would also fly out to other countries, like in Africa, or he would go to the Philippines or, and just give these workshops. And, my dad always claimed like, I didn't want to witness to anyone. I just wanted to spread good word or like life lessons or something like that. And I'm like, Dad, is in my head, I'm like, but it's a cult and you're making them warm up to a cult leader. Like, I don't know. I think it's really hard for my parents to face. They can't believe. I don't know that they'll ever digest it. And a lot of my friends say the same things who grew up in the church. They're like, I don't want to confront my parents because that's all they have. And like, if they realize that it was all just like this mafia family they were working for, then they'll just like be so distraught in their golden years. You want them to, it's like, let them have their like lie, or let them have their, beliefs about what they did and why they did it. I don't doubt that there were moments of kindness and everything like that, but what it was rooted in was the problem. So yeah.
And have you had any type of conversation with you? Well, you mentioned that you've interviewed your father for some personal work, but have you ever sat down and had this kind of conversation with them about your thoughts and feelings growing up in the church and how those things affected you? I mean, because you've spoken out on loads of different platforms. So have you ever just said, Dad, watch this interview? Let me know what you think.
I only did it once where for the A&E one where it was against, Sean Moon and his gun cult. Yeah. I told my family about that because it was like a splinter group and I figured they're probably not for that. So yeah, but everything else, I just don't show them and I rely on their being older and being kind of afraid of technology to like, yeah, to not come across it. Maybe one of their friends will send something, but there was actually one time where like I wasn't aware that they would see it. I did, let's see, right after Trump was elected, I wrote an article. I contributed to the Huffington Post about comparing Trump to Sun Myung Moon and like Trump's followers to the Unification Church. And my parents are Trump supporters, and yeah, which has been hard ever since he's been elected. They've always been into Fox News, and basically, the Unification Church is a far right cult that gives a lot of money and like, has contributing entities and figures to the far right. They're an engine for the far right. That's how I describe them. And the Washington Times is, for example, is a Mooney paper. But yeah, so when he saw that, I was like, that hit me really hard, and I kind of got into a fight and blew up, and they were like, I was like, Dad, this changes everything. Like now you know how I really feel and how strongly I feel about it. And he's like, no, I don't think it changes. And I was like, like, I think my parents are just, they when you're so used to like living in a bubble where you get taught not to trust your own instincts anymore. You don't understand the impact of things like that. You're just like, oh, he'll come around, or oh, I don't know if that's, so it's hard to talk to them about stuff like that. That's why I don't bring it up, and I don't feel like their feet are like planted in the ground enough. They rely on things like Fox News and like kind of far right outlets and some woo-woo entities here and there. They've been in a lot of like multi-level marketing things. They're in one now, and I think it's a whole world. It's not even about Republican or Democrat. It's about like trusting fringe more than trusting, what's like mainstream, quote unquote. So yeah, that's kind of what I see in them and why I can't just talk to them easily about stuff.
Yeah. It's just something I was wondering about, because you're such a such a powerful voice behind all of the raising awareness around the Unification Church, that I wondered if it was inevitable that they would see something, whether you'd had that discussion or not. So that's interesting. And you mentioned before when you were growing up as kids and just kind of having access to these beautiful spaces and kind of all having the opportunity to be together and play together, and it all sounds very pure and innocent, sort of, you have no idea at this point the kind of the church that you're growing up in, I suppose. Is there a point that you can recall where that changed, where you started having that maybe seeds of doubt, or thinking, I don't know if that's sort of the same as everybody else in my school and things like that?
Yeah. I think when we moved to Seattle, like my family got distance from Seattle, because that community doesn't really have like, it's a little more spread out. It's a little more loose. And there's church veterans who live there who, again, were in the first wave of Unification Church. So they're kind of over it, and they saw how it changed and became more about money and power. Whereas I guess when it first started, it was a little more small and like, a little more wholesome, I guess, in a way. So yeah, so when we moved to Seattle, I got some distance from the church, and I realized that the Moons, who I grew up near, I was like, it's wrong that they were really violent, and like they would beat up people who would express an opinion. Like they'd beat up teenage boys, like who corrected them or said something they didn't like my older brother's friends. So getting distance from it, yeah. We moved when I was 13 or 12, 13. I don't, sometime around then. Yeah, I just started developing like away from this concentrated, headquarters of the church. And yeah, I started to meet people in high school, and yeah, it was like really like actually no one knew about the Moonies in Seattle, or it had already been kind of like old news from the 80s. And this was in like the early mid 90s. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I just have to kind of start over. And I just started getting to know people. And yeah, that was it. It was just realizing that, there's like nice people in the world. And I started to think like, wow, like I give the church all my trust and identity and everything. And like, there's people who don't even care about all these rules and stuff in the real world. And so I would say, yeah, maybe high school, that's where I started to kind of loosen up, and it started loosening its hold on me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What was the reason for the move to Seattle? Was that through your parents' responsibility to the church?
Yeah, it was purely because Sun Myung Moon's, he wanted to spread the witnessing effort. So he said, move to your father's hometown. And so it was sad. It was like all of our, all my childhood friends, the only people I was like concentrated on trusting, we all had to break up. And it was, yeah, it was rough. And yeah, so we just moved there, and it was very sobering. Yeah. No more fancy properties and stuff. It was just like we were the older brothers and sisters. We were one of the older families. I think most of the older families lived in New York. So we had to like be the older brothers and sisters who had these like meetings and events with the kids, and, be in a position of responsibility. So
I wonder what types of conversations your parents had behind closed doors when you were children, things that they might have protected you from when they thought like, oh, we're going to have to leave everything. The kids are going to have to leave everything, but we have to do this because we're committed to changing the world for the better. So in order to do that, we have to move to. So I wonder how difficult or easy those decisions were, not just for your parents, but for all of the families that are asked to do such massive tasks and to commit to such huge changes because their movement asks them to. I just wonder, when I speak to, I just recently finished an interview with a woman who was in Scientology, and she joined the Sea Org when she was 13, and her mother signed over guardianship to somebody that this 13-year-old had never met before, and I think only ended up meeting 2 or 3 times in her time in the Sea Org. And we talked a lot about, what her mum might have been thinking or feeling, and the relationship with her and her mum now, and all those things. And I just wonder what conversation the mother had with herself when she was about to sign those papers, and think, but this is what Scientology is asking of me and my child. And in order for us to change the world for the better in the way that Scientology wants to do it, as opposed to the Unification Church, this is what we have to do, and this is what we have to commit to. So it's for somebody on the outside, because we'll never know the answers to those questions. It's always something I want to know more about. I just finished watching the Cecil Hotel documentary on Netflix, and the unsolved mystery of what really happened with Elisa Lam is something that everybody in the unsolved mystery community wants to know about. That's one of the big ones that everybody wants to know the real answers to. And because we will never know, it's human nature for everybody to want to know even more so what really happened. So I really do wonder if your parents spoke about it, maybe they never spoke about it, and it was like this big unspoken thing that happened where you just packed up and left. I don't know. What do you think?
I think I would think, yeah, maybe I would refer to maybe like my mom having more instincts than my dad. I think my dad just did whatever the church told him, like they adopted him pretty much. And I don't like, he was very not connected with the kids and what we wanted. So, but my mom might have probably thought of that a bit more. But yeah, like they didn't sit us down and be like, I know this is going to be really hard or whatever. And I kind of got mad at them for that, like years later, like well into adulthood, and like, you don't know what it's like for us. And, you know, they just seem to, I don't know. I did like a hand swiping over my head motion. I think because whatever experience we had in the church or that we're angry about, like they know that they chose this church, or they think they chose it, but there's like a process of cult indoctrination. But anyway, yeah, so no, they I think they just like, a lot of that gets thrown out the door when you join a cult. Like there's no consideration for personal feelings, and you can't really have your own life. You can't really think. It's just, they're like, okay, we have to do this now. And because the Messiah told us we have to do it, everything's going to be fine. And we're all going to adjust. And, I don't know. I mean, I think it varies between families. Again, like the difference between my mom and my dad, like some people had really good parents in the church and they just kind of had a more kind of loose relationship with the church. And I think everyone's opinion about the church, a lot of it depends on their own family experience. Like that's kind of a pattern I see. So yeah, they just, I don't know. There wasn't a lot of talk about it. I mean, all the kids were kind of sad, and I don't know. We never grieved in our family. Like,
that's another thing. I've just released an episode from another person that I interviewed from Scientology, and he spoke a lot about how he is only now grieving the childhood that Scientology took from him. And that's something that his therapist is helping him work through, the fact that there is something to grieve, even though he's still here physically. There was so much of his life that wasn't really his at such a young age, and all these experiences that he missed out on, that he is now going through that grieving process. So I mean, you mentioned that there are things that you were angry about with growing up, being involved in the Unification Church, and I wonder if there's things that your parents are angry about as well. I just think there's so many things parents don't tell their children, and I just really wonder if your parents are as passive about it as you think they are. I don't know. It's just really, I'm just speculating. But you have recently, well, I was reading something that you've recently written, which I found on medium.com, called Extremism is a Team Sport. And in that you used the phrase Mooniverse, and I smiled when I read that, because I wondered if that was a term that you'd created or something that is used within the Unification Church.
No, someone else asked me about that too. I was like, whoops, shouldn't have used it. That's totally my own word. I don't know. Yeah.
So Mooniverse is one of your terms, but was there any language that's used within the Unification Church that somebody like myself might not understand straight away?
Yeah, well, the church uses, or Moon used the word true for everything. That was kind of his appropriated brand name for everything. He's like, true love. That's what you find in the church. Or like, they changed the name God's Day, which is New Year's Day, to True God's Day. Like, it's like, we're going to make true families and in a true world. And it's so, and then it's like, things that are just are. You don't have to add anything, and that's how you can tell it's phony. So anyway, but like, so yeah, there's true on everything. He called his family the True Family, which is hardly, they're toxic as hell. And like, let's see, Yeah, well, the fact that it comes from Korea and there's a lot of Japanese members is there's a lot of broken English terms that just stuck. Like there's this word heartistic. It's like we have to have a heartistic attitude. And like sometimes I catch some of my ex-Mooney friends saying that and I'm like, oh, don't. Like anyway. Artistic. There's all these weird like pseudoscience kind of philosophies from the divine principle, which is the Bible of the Unification Church, which is basically a mixture of like Christianity and Confucianism, which is kind of what Sun Myung Moon grew up with. So we grew up with these like charts, these scientific looking charts of like, there's the 4-position foundation, which is like God on the top and then husband and wife in the middle as these two bubbles, and then child is on the bottom, and it's like this cycle of harmony. And it's like you don't need a chart for that, bro. Like I don't know. There's like give and take, like we need to have give and take, and like mind body unity, like duality was a huge theme in the church. Just like protons and electrons, we have to have like man and woman. But where it got dark was like, there's like this subject-object relationship, right? Like where there's a subjugator and there's the follower. And so one of the things they taught was in a relationship, man is the subject, woman is the object. And so a lot of women like later on who I talked to online, who grew up in the Moonies, like were like, I went home and cried when I heard about that. And like, I told my mom, like, I don't want to be an object. And it makes me so angry to think about. It's so disgusting. So anyway, yeah. I'm trying to think of any more like crazy term. Oh, there's something called like universal prime force, which I don't even know what it is, but it's another bloated bag of hot air. Basically, it probably just means like synergy or something, I don't know.
But, sounds like something from the Transformers universe.
Or Scientology. Yeah. Maybe they like borrowed some terms. I don't know.
Yeah, I think they all kind of dip in and out of each other's textbooks here and there, especially Nexium. Nexium seems to be a combination of just all the worst parts of every single high control group that's ever existed. But if you think of any more while we go, just let me know. And I'll keep going through all of these questions. I did actually mention in my email, I asked you if you had any idea of the numbers of the Unification Church, and you came back to me and said that there's no way to know for sure how many official members there are of the church, because the numbers are most likely manipulated to look a certain way.
Yeah, there's no accuracy. But I will say there's one guy, I think his name is Michael Mickler, and he is like the documenter of the church. Like he actually writes some accurate, so I guess I'll take that back a little. At least he, like, it almost makes me wonder how much in the church he is. I'm like, what? He's not lying. It doesn't sound like he's lying. Like he's talking critically about the church. So he talks about like the history of the Unification Church and what worked when. And I think there's a book called like The History of the Unification Church he wrote. And it actually talks about where the labor trafficking started and where just having brick and mortar shops for the Unification Church ended, because it made a lot more money. And that's when things got, put in fifth gear and kind of nasty. But yeah, so yeah, no, they just, who knows? There's so much narcissism and so much grandiosity that there's just no way of telling. But there's enough to build, international businesses and to influence politics. And, there's like True World Foods, which is, I think, probably still the #1 distributor of fish to sushi restaurants in America. Last I read, I think it was over 9,000 restaurants they distribute fish for. I think it started because Sun Myung Moon, he liked fishing. And so everyone's like, oh, it's this holy thing that we all have to do. And then they make this empire of a company because this one guy likes fishing. So like, I don't know, it did really well. But and it's successful, and they have a handful of successful businesses. But it's what I don't like is it's all based on labor trafficking. That's how they get ahead. There's no venture capitalists to invest in the business. It's people like you and me who get coerced away from their families and then eventually live in a van where for years, sometimes over a decade, people will be selling door to door, making money for the church, and only like spending enough on themselves to get fast food or whatever they need to help sell better the next day. That's their venture capitalists. It's slavery basically. So
I remember watching something briefly with Stephen Hassan when he mentioned that he was out selling door to door with his team and on the streets, and they were all so exhausted that he ended up in a car accident, and it was actually in the hospital where he got to have some rest and eat properly and see his family that he was like, oh, that's something's not right. I shouldn't have to do all of those things to appease the church I'm a part of. How does that make the world a better place? Looking for your next true crime podcast binge? Do you love all things crime, cult, and controversy? Then check out Crime Juicy Cocktail Hour. Every week, the girls Carrie Ann, Krista, and Becca research and pick apart juicy topics from alluring cult leaders to cold cases to human trafficking and much more in their multidisciplinary think tank, Over Drinks. Sometimes they even call in the experts. So grab your juice and tune into Crime Juicy Cocktail Hour on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Bringing in money for the church and then not knowing what that money's being used towards in terms of changing the world for the better, which is very similar to Scientology and the Sea Org and the types of labor that they have the Sea Org members carry out, and then there's not much record of that money being used to, I don't know, feed the hungry, educate people that might not have the opportunity to obtain any kind of education. So I mean, you talk about labor trafficking in the sense of people going out and selling things and kind of living a really basic life. So it's like even living in your car is like a homeless lifestyle almost, isn't it? Like you're living in your van and kind of going meal to meal, just trying to make this money for the church. What is the youngest we know of people being labor trafficked in the Unification Church?
Well, there's a program called STF, or Special Task Force. It's kind of like what the Mormons do after you graduate high school. It could be a year or 2 years or however long you want to do it, which can become a trap if you have that kind of mentality, where you get a taste of, like, quote unquote, the front line of the church, where you witness on college campuses but it's mostly fundraising, mostly doing what's called MFT, or mobile fundraising teams. That's what they call it. It's basically labor trafficking. And so, I did that. I did that for a year and a half. And like, I'd say maybe half the time, or maybe more than half the time, you sleep in a motel. Everyone just sneaks in to like 1 or 2 rooms. That's how they do it. And like, to save money. But if you didn't do well that day or whatever, you sleep in the van. So, and you just go door to door and you try to sell. You don't really say exactly what it's for. You say like, I'm doing this for like a student group or something like that. And we sold little trinkets like keychains or like wind chimes. And some of the really culty parts are like when it's all cash, and like there's no tax or anything, it's really freaking illegal. But one of the culty things is like you have to unfold all the like corners of the dollar bills and make them flat so that they're like presentable because it's like holy money. There's little things like that. But another thing I was going to mention before this is like, I think most people would be like, how could anyone be convinced to do that? Like, no one wants to live their life doing that. So I saw this documentary recently on the Reels channel, the REELZ. It's just called Mooney's Cult of Personality. Cult of Personality is like their cult documentary series. And I didn't know this before, but so Sun Myung Moon was in a prison camp in North Korea. I think at the time, this is when he was younger and he still lived in Korea. I think the North Koreans thought he was like a spy from South Korea, and he could have been. It could have been in some CIA stuff. And he basically, so I think in North Korea, it's kind of like in China where there's this indoctrination thing that happens in jail. It's like their way of trying to reform people and make them better. So there's like a method to it of where you kind of have people go from like, you just kind of exhaust them until they have to accept, what they're presented. So according to this documentary, Sun Myung Moon took those methods and he brought them into the, American witnessing effort in these retreat centers, in like Boonville, California. That was a big one. I think that's probably where my dad went. And they would do stuff like from lecture to lecture. They would just like go from lecture to lecture, and they do these like exhaustive physical exercises. There's something called choo choo pow, where they would just hold hands and go choo choo pow, choo choo pow. It's basically it basically like pushes out any space you have to like think for yourself or process anything. And I've also heard they had like low protein foods so that, you didn't have a lot of empowerment, even physically, in those centers. But yeah, when I heard it came from North Korea, I was like, wow, like, there you go. That's so, one thing I also learned about brain science, like in this whole cult research stuff, is that like your brain actually like physically changes to adapt to whatever environment you're in so that it works in that, for survival. So your neural pathways will reform to kind of adjust to like, survive in that world. And that's where, people become convinced to be labor trafficked and feel like it's the right thing to do, because everyone around them in that closed environment is like, yeah, this is this is the best thing we can do for the world. So yeah,
I think there's a big misconception. I've spoken about this a few times on other episodes, but there's a big misconception around the type of person that can be indoctrinated or become a victim of thought reform, and that is that the person has to be kind of weak-willed or lower in intelligence or gullible. And it's not that at all. I mean, I'm talking to yourself now. I recently spoke to Dr. Yanya Lalich as well, and she's clearly not on the lower level of intelligence, and she is obviously not a weak-willed woman either. But so many of the people I've spoken to, so many of the cult experts and advocates like yourself that speak out are clearly not the stereotypical people that the general public may assume are gullible enough, in inverted commas, to be brought into these things. And the reason that it happens is much like what you've just said. It's a very specific methodology that's put in place to almost change your brain chemistry. And there's so many different techniques that are used that you don't even have a chance to realize what's happening to you before it's already happened. And it could be anything from moving to a new city and not knowing anybody and being loved bombed by the local Christian Bible group or library study group or yoga group or the people at the fresh fruit and veg stand, or I don't know what. Yeah, all the way through to things like bereavement or mental illness or just a change in jobs, or just like your father was, just young. You described him as a hippie, somebody who might just be seeking something, looking for something, not quite sure what it is. And it can be anybody in any of these transitional periods, no matter how minor or major that period is, where they're kind of swooped up into these situations. And it's something I think we've touched upon quite a lot in terms of trying to change the perception on the type of person that can be indoctrinated, because at the end of it all, the answer, I think, is any person.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, and that's great, and I'm glad that knowledge seems to be kind of getting around more, that it's anyone, and it's not that people are stupid or too poor or whatever. But at the same time, I do think that people who are really hungry for it, they're going to probably fall into it a little more. Or if someone like my dad, who didn't grow up with a lot of stability, and he sees these people who want him, and it's a stable, he looks around these nice properties, that's going to be more alluring. So it might happen faster for those people, but it's not a black and white thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just a sense of community and belonging, like-mindedness, all of those, who doesn't want all of those things? Who doesn't, we're a tribal species, is the way somebody described it in a previous interview. And I thought that was a perfect summary for why it's so appealing to be part of such a strong community. It just seems to be so unfortunate that it's like in Wild Country, what they were building there was their utopia, and they really the way that the members spoke about it, and even the way Sheila spoke about it, it was beautiful. They all had a vision, they all believed in the same thing. It's a lot like Jonestown, when you watch the interviews of the people that that were a part of that movement, and luckily managed to either escape or never made the move over to Jonestown in Guyana. But they talk about it being amazing and beautiful. And it's so unfortunate, because even Scientology on a base level seems to have some good advice for well-being and improving your well-being, but it seems why can't they stay at that level? Why does it have to grow into something so sinister and evil and controlling and manipulative and exploitive and abusive? Why can't it just remain at those levels where everybody's part of a community and nobody's being taken advantage of? That's the really unfortunate thing about all of these movements.
Yeah, I talk about that. Well, I go in and out of trying stand-up comedy. I was really determined last time, but then the pandemic happened, and I was like, ugh. So yeah, I might go back into it now that I'm in New York. Actually, I kind of enjoy the scene here. So but I was saying how I did a routine where I was trying to make it like the indoctrination process more understandable to everyday people. It's not this weird, bizarre thing. It feels very normal. Have you ever dated someone who turned out to be wildly different than when you first met them, maybe months earlier? And then my joke was you, and then at some point your friends are saying, but he ate your cat and he blamed you for making it look tasty. So that's kind of like the narcissist thing, it's it's a skill. See, that's the thing about narcissists, like Trump and Moon, is because who knows how much it's nature versus nurture, but if it's nature, then it's their whole lives, they have been practicing this skill, ever since they were born, of sadly, to escape the feeling of being a bottomless nothing. That's at the heart of a narcissist. And so they have to constantly prove themselves and win people over. So they get better and better and better and better. And then once they get comfortable enough with people, they just are I don't have to try anymore. And then just become despicable. And sadly, that kind of happened in this country, over the last 4 years. But so that's kind of, I think there is that, but it's just, yeah, you really have to look at the roots of any organization that you get
Yeah.
involved.
I mean, it's funny if what you just said about the making the cat look tasty as well, because that's almost like the gaslighting technique that's used by so many. You know, when Trump would say something in a sentence, and then a reporter would say, "You just said this," and he'd say, "No, I didn't." And then Moon
Yeah.
says, "You cannot have sex outside of marriage, but I'm married and I'm going to sleep with loads of different people, but it's okay because my semen is making them pure, it's purifying their wombs, so I'm actually doing them a favor by having these relationships outside of marriage, and then having illegitimate children outside of marriage, which is
Yeah.
literally like more sinful in inverted commas than having sex before you're married, surely. In the eyes of Christianity and Orthodox Christianity and anything to do with the Bible, that's worse than, like, me and my partner aren't married and we have a child, so we're not in the Unification Church either, but we're, you know, we've had a child out of wedlock together, but at least we're still together.
Mm.
And I don't know, I can't make sense of it. It's really hard for me to get my head around, other than the fact that he's this tyrant and he can basically just do what he wants, but no one else is allowed to do the same.
Yeah, I think it ties back to that Korean shamanism. Like, I had heard that, like, I heard a podcast that talked about, like, before Queen Victoria, like, sex was just, it wasn't like this taboo thing. Like, it was just people, like, there wasn't quote unquote kink. It was just like, you do sex your way. And
Yes,
right. So,
yes.
like,
I spoke about this in my dissertation. I
yeah.
was talking about masculinity throughout
Mhm.
history. So I went from talking about ancient Rome and ancient Greece all the way through to masculinity in today's age.
Mhm.
Um, and they used to hang phalluses on their doors for luck and fertility. They used to carry around huge wooden statues of penises. They had in ancient Greece, they would worship Dionysus, which meant like wine and food and fornication. And it was only when the queen came in and started banishing phallic symbols and started telling everybody that they needed to be hanging crosses above their doors instead for the church, that it became like this weird, like, almost, it became like reclusive almost, and people became like just really strange talking about sex and be like, oh no, you can't talk about sex. And I don't know,
Can
it's
you imagine, like, being in that time and just being like, what? Like, that's just, this is good luck.
yeah, it was actually seen in ancient Greek times to be masculine if you had a if you were in a same-sex situation. So a
Mhm.
lot of the time, unfortunately, this is where I think I don't agree with it. You were seen as more masculine if you were a man in a position of power that had a young boy as your counterpart.
That.
So that's not something I agree with. But a lot of the time, it was encouraged that people would be in same-sex circles,
Mhm.
and that was celebrated. So yeah, it kind of feels like we went really far backwards, and now everybody's like, we need to be progressive, and it's like, no, we need to just go back, but even further than when it was repressive, um and get back to kind of hanging phalluses all over the place. But yeah, it's just really interesting that you said that.
Yeah, I mean, it did make me think about all that, just learning about Moon's past and everything. I'm like, wow, this was normal in his life, and we're not. Yeah, it's like what you said. That we're not on a timeline where we're coming out of sexual repression. We're actually kind of in the thick of it still. But like, yeah, I don't know. I read something once. I forgot this source, but like, it talked about how Moon was he was kind of a product of American Christian colonizers, more or less, going to Korea and missionaries, and maybe they gave him the idea that he could overpower like other people or whatever. And then there was Japan too, that Imperial Japan, Um, yeah, so I think, yeah, I remember this one Korean artist, David Cho, talked about it. He talked about how in Korea, like, there's a lot of pride whenever there's like an empowered like Korean thing in pop culture or whatever, because Korea had faced a lot of oppression and people taking advantage of them, like other nations and stuff. So um, anyway, but yeah, I'd heard that before, that there was like a Christian. There's a lot of Christianity in Korea. It's huge, and there's a lot of Christian cults in Korea. So there's something that Moon was a part of that was like a bigger thing happening in the nation.
Mm-hmm. And did you ever visit? Did you ever go back, or did you ever go to Japan with your mum, or did you ever go to explore that part of your heritage, kind of either in the church or even out of the church?
Yeah, I did. Let's see. Yeah, because my mom was kind of like one of the earliest members, and um, she just learned the hard way that it's like they're not going to let you do this. Isn't normal, mom. Like, I don't know. Like, I remember she told me once that when her dad died, she was like, "Oh, I have to go fly back to go to his funeral," and they were like, "Wait, no, like we're afraid you're going to leave." And then she was like, she had to convince them that she wasn't going to leave. And it's just like right there. And I was like, Mom, like I just straight up said, like, don't you realize that's so wrong? At a regular job, like they would be like, there would be a lawsuit against them if they even tried to do that. And like, but she's just like, well, we just worked it out. I'm like, oh God. But anyway,
I think there's a big difference between working something out, like if you have a bit of a fallout with a friend, than there is negotiating the terms of your release so that you can go to your own father's funeral.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is that, cults recruit in college. College kids are fresh out of, they're open, they're vulnerable, they just left their parents' home, they're finding themselves. Mm-hmm. So when cults have so much success in college, because like they pull people in, and then as an adult, that becomes your normal. You don't know anything else. You don't know that you have a choice in other things. And those choices are scary because you're taught not to trust your choices. So like, that's all they have. And I knowing that, like, I'm like, I can't really talk them out of things. I can introduce them to things and hope they bite, but you can take a horse to water, right? Can't make a drink.
So when you were growing up, before you moved over to Seattle, did you go to these ceremonies with Moon and your family? Mm-hmm. So what was that like? Because I'm seeing you speaking in the Explained episode, where you're like, oh my goodness, here he is, he's coming out on stage, it's Sun Myung Moon, oh my goodness. So is it like a frenzy moment, almost like when Pentecostals have the spirit and they're kind of like doing the really culty, arms up in the air, eyes rolling in the back of their heads kind of thing?
I think for the people who joined, I think for our parents, it was a big deal because they had the Kool-Aid. But us being born into it, to us, it was like, he was like our president or something. So we were just like, oh yeah, we're supposed to bow now. I don't think anyone really felt any kind of greatness. At least I didn't. Maybe I was a little jaded because I grew up around him, and his family were all a bunch of, toxic, violent people that, not all of them, but some enough to like be like, wow, this is like, I hate these people. But just at the Manhattan Center during church holidays, it was like on the 4th or 5th floor or something of this building where the Hammerstein Ballroom is, which is, a pretty prominent New York City venue where a lot of big bands go. So above that, for years before the Hammerstein Ballroom even opened, there's like a room with a stage, and I think the WWE, which is like pro wrestling, like they use that room now. That's where we had entertainment. They just called it entertainment for like church holidays, like Parents' Day, God's Day, Children's Day, whatever. And it was just kind of like performances. People would rehearse and they would maybe play a cover song, or like, have these mini plays, or kind of like Shen Yun or something, and like to entertain the Moons and the rest of us. So we'd all just sit there and watch the show and to me, I was like, I'm just here because my friends are here. Like, I just wanted to see my friends. But yeah, so like in the beginning of any of those performances, like on the top right, there was a balcony. So on the top right balcony, it's like, ladies and gentlemen, the true parents of mankind, Reverend and Mrs. Sun Myung Moon. And yeah, they would have this big spotlight and they'd come out and be like, it's like this politician kind of thing, like almost like a parade. And everyone's like, yeah. And then we'd all bow and clap and like, they would take their seat at the way back that there's like the balcony seats that are all like, there's this clearance kind of area, which is, and yeah, it was just them. And they would always, his kids would always have this jaded look on their face, like, yeah, whatever, we're just at another one of these. And like, I don't know, like, geez, it was just, yeah, this whole production.
Sounds like we have a thing over here called the Royal Variety Show, and that's for the Queen. It sounds exactly the same. She's up there on the little balcony with the funny wave, and they're introducing her, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's the Queen!" And then loads of people just do like music, dance. We have a couple of talent shows over here. Like I know you've got America's Got Talent, so we have Britain's Got Talent, and the winners of Britain's Got Talent get to perform at the Royal Variety Show for the Queen. That's the big prize. So sounds very similar. Now I'm kind of wondering about the Queen.
Except yours is like a legitimate legacy. Ours is built on a lot of corruption, but anyway, yeah.
That's true. That is true. I mean, I don't think the royal family's hands are clean either, but that's a story for another day.
Yeah, actually, I was second guessing what I said right after I
said it. So, you mentioned briefly about the true family, and that being the label that the Moon family had themselves, and being the true father, true mother, and those things. And you mentioned the subject and object mentality that kind of exists within the Unification Church. And I just wanted to touch on briefly some allegations that have been made against Moon and some of his sons about domestic violence towards wives and daughters and daughter-in-law. So have you ever heard about any of this stuff being sort of close to the inner circle, or throughout all of your research since leaving, around the types of allegations that have been made?
Yeah. I think it was 1999, the book In the Shadow of the Moons came out, it was written by Nansa Kong, who is the ex-wife of Hyojin Moon, or Steve Moon, who was, growing up in Tarrytown, in that, he had a temper. Like we would sometimes go to his early morning speeches on Sundays before church, and he would just vent. He's just like, how dare you judge me? Like, you don't know me. Like, he was just an angry kid. He was just probably had a really toxic upbringing, spoiled, but at the same time, like, had expectations. And anyway, so when her book came out, where she highlights how, he would keep a gun under the bed, and how he would threaten her and threaten to, hurt her while she was pregnant. If he didn't, I don't know if she pissed him off, or if I think one time, she hid his cocaine, or she flushed the toilet. Yeah. And he beat her, and, things like that. When that came out, I wasn't even surprised. A lot of people were shocked, and that was like this revelatory moment. And I'm like, he seems like, and I was maybe like, I don't know, 17, 16. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like something he would do. Like, I just knew to stay the hell away from him. But it was weird. It was like, sometimes he'd be very older brotherly. I mean, that's, any person's like that. I think a lot of abusers are like, they put on a front of being like, everyone wants to be liked, right? So he would come around sometimes when we were on a church property, and he would like play baseball a little bit with us. So, and we'd all be like, what an honor, like look at each other like, oh my God. But just like when we moved away from him and we didn't have to, perform anymore, We were like, man, if I would totally hit that guy if he came after me or got angry at me, because he was one of the main guys who like beat up my older brother's friends for like, you know, him and Preston or Hyungjin Moon, who runs, I think it's called like Family Peace something. I forgot his organization. He changed it again. They always change their names because I think there's too much dirt on like the old name. So it used to be called Global Peace Foundation. But yeah, so Hyungjin or H1 because it sounds like Hyunjin Sean Moon, who does Sanctuary Church, the gun cult. His name is Hyun, or yeah, Hyun without the G, and then H2 is like, yeah, Sanctuary Church guy. Yeah, this guy was like, he really liked Elvis, so he's like a good looking guy, so he always like covered an Elvis song like at the entertainment or whatever, and but and he was really charismatic, and some second generations even thought like, I remember one of them was talking online, like he was like, oh, he seemed like okay, he didn't seem like such a bad guy, he was nice to me and da da da. And then like one of the older brothers who got personally beat up by him was like, no, don't trust this person, like, he's violent, and like he'll act like this when you act agreeably with him, but this person, I know for a fact that he had this one guy do all his homework from him, exactly like Mary Trump's book, where she said that, I think it was even Donald Trump or something had, or one of the Trumps had someone do all of his homework for him, and it's really phony. So Hyunjin H1, Preston Moon, I'll just call him Preston. One time he was driving with this one guy who was supposed to do his homework, and he didn't do it on time or something. And what I heard is that he stripped this guy naked in winter, and he just left him out in the cold in the middle of the highway, like to walk home like by himself.
Oh my goodness, that sounds that sounds horrendous.
Yeah, so this guy he owns the Washington Times now, and he owns, True World Food. He owns a lot of the business end stuff of the church. I think through lawsuits he got it like against. Well, I think everyone knew that after Sun Myung Moon died, it would just be this total fight for power. So he won over the businesses, and so he's like running stuff. And whenever I hear of anything in the news or see him, something about him, or he got some kind of UN thing, I don't know. Like I wrote to the UN, I'm like, let me tell you about this guy, and then I send sources.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you ever get a response from that?
No.
At least, I mean, at least you've raised that awareness. But the thing that stood out for me around what Nunsuk had said in her writing, which a lot of it I read on the TP Parents website, which you mentioned before, which is just such a wealth of information when it comes to the Unification Church and testimonials against the church and things like that, was that when she approached Sun Myung Moon himself to tell him what had happened to her, that she'd tried to flush his drugs and that he had beaten her senseless while she was pregnant, he said, it is your destiny to experience these things. This is your path, and you've brought these things on yourself. And my son is not at fault, basically. And when I read that, my heart just broke, because I thought, there is no protection for women within that church. Yeah. And there is no protection for anybody other than Moon and his immediate family. Right. I think it was just, as soon as I read that, I thought, if Moon can commit, infidelity, if his sons can use the money from the Unification Church that they were getting from Mrs. Moon to go on drug-fueled binges and to keep, really expensive semi-automatic weapons under their beds and have a huge cache of these weapons in their luxurious homes, that to me just goes to show that the power in corruption means that the family can never be touched, but anybody else can be. And then there's children involved, and that makes you worry about what's going to happen to, Nunsuck and the children if she was to speak out, because she's pregnant at this time that she's been seriously assaulted. And luckily the kids and Nunsuck later that night actually got in a car and managed to escape. And then she wrote her book and came out and spoke about everything. But when you spoke about the subject object mentality of the Unification Church, that was the first thing that popped into my head, was this sort of heinous thing that had happened to this poor woman at the very, very top of the pyramid.
Yeah, they blamed her. The parents blamed her. There's just no justice for women in the church. They think it's too progressive, quote unquote. And in larger fundamental Christianity, there's a lot of misogynist passages in the Bible, and they just like point to those, so yeah.
And just going back to the Explained episode, which is available on Netflix and YouTube for anybody that wants to go and watch. It's a really good episode of Explained. I don't know if anybody's watched Explained, but they do like one episode on a particular subject. So they'll talk about something like gold. And there's one episode that's specifically titled Cults that Teddy appears on. And so does Dr. Yanya Lalich as well. And you spoke about retreats in that episode, and go into these retreats. I don't know if it's the same thing you mentioned before that's like Bible school, but you would use that as a way to indoctrinate new members or bring new people into the church. So if I've got that right, can you just explain to the listeners how that process works?
Sure. Okay. So when I did STF or the Frontline program, I was stationed in San Francisco, and I actually talk. I don't know if I'm allowed to cross promote.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay. I actually talk about this in a podcast called Muni Diaries. Muni means like municipal transportation. It's like stories about San Francisco public transit. But sometimes they have this one chapter of it called San Francisco Diaries, and so I talk to them about that. Like right after high school, I did the STF program, was stationed in San Francisco. So we would go down to like the main touristy area, which is Powell and Market Street, where the cable cars, there's like, they still physically rotate the cable cars with this big crank. And so there's like a big mall by there. It's by like a train station. So a lot of foot traffic there. We would go there with like questions of the universe on a clipboard and just walk up to people and try to like whet their appetite for questions of the universe and God. And it's like, basically it's like, well, we have the answers, so come with us, said in a much smoother way, but like, oh, you should come to this student group, quote unquote. And so we would bring someone to like a church center that wasn't, was within walking distance of there, either after the conversation, but it was usually like maybe later if they even showed up. So this was on Bush Street, and it's now an Academy of Art student housing building. But it used to be a Unification Church Center where there were a bunch of members living there, and they were just full-time recruits, like witnessing and fundraising again, or being labor trafficked, or we would just bring them over and basically, quote unquote, love bomb them, right? Like we would just shower them with attention and interest and ask about them. And, in one sense, it was kind of cool, like just getting to know people, like me kind of doing it as like a temporary, frontline person or whatever. Like it was cool for me to just like get to know people. Of course, I would never do that now, but and then they put on like a mini kind of like talent show thing for them. Like after a meal, we served them. So we just made it feel like this fun student group. The people would do like cover songs on guitar. Like maybe I would play a song by Nirvana or something. And this one guy had this like this funny act of being like a bad magician, and that was like this funny like thing. Like it was cool to see all these Moonies and like what they're really about, like how creative they are. Like this is a moment where they could shine as individuals. I was like, so it just felt like really wholesome and like nice. And then the next step was to be like, hey, we're going to go to this retreat center and, learn more about these principles or whatever. And so this was a place called Macama Hill, like Macaama. I believe that's I forgot where the double A is. There's 3 potential areas. Anyway, but yeah, Macama Hill, it was up north, maybe about a few hours north. And it was just like some cabins in the woods. And yeah, there was like a chalkboard and we would, I don't, it wasn't as intense as it used to be with the choo choo pow and those exercises like the North Korean thing. I think maybe the church got my guess is they got a bad reputation from that after some like movies and like news reports came out. So it was a lot more kind of hands off and, but there was still kind of the soft love bombing. Like we'd have a campfire at the end of the night and we'd sing songs and just kind of talk about our lives and get them in the zone of like wanting their like intimacy, wanting their, personality. And, that's how it works. It's like, I don't know if you hear this saying in Britain, but it's like how to boil a frog in water. You know that analogy?
Yeah, I think, is it? Oh, well, I don't know. There's one that's like out of the frying pan into the fire or something like that.
Like, so
I
this one is
suppose that's when someone leaves one cult and goes to another. That would be a good example of out of the frying pan into the fire.
I see.
So I think they're different.
Yeah. No, this is actually a little different. It's like the way you boil a frog is like you can't throw it in boiling water, it'll jump out. You have to boil it slowly.
Yeah. That's a really good way of explaining it, actually, isn't it? Like the process over time.
Yeah, it's just a slow drip method, and gives your mind and your neural pathways time to adjust and to like. So yeah, whereas I guess in the 60s or 70s it was a little more intense, but yeah. And so, I think because it wasn't as intense, like, and because of the bad press in the 80s and 70s and such, like even Saturday Night Live had like a sketch about it with Bill Murray and like Dan Aykroyd in 1977, I believe, that made fun of the Moonies. So, and the movie Airplane and, pop culture, there was a lot of that. There was a movie called Ticket to Heaven that very accurately documents or is a biopic of like someone's experience. I think it's a biopic or it might be fiction, but it's based on someone's experience of being, indoctrinated into the Moonies and then deprogrammed. But yeah, anyway, I'm glad I didn't bring anyone in there. I wasn't sure how much I believed myself. I was just trying the STF program to see if this was for me. Mm-hmm. So I was a little more hands off. Well, you can't really be hands off doing STF and being labor trafficked, but at least as far as the indoctrination part, I was kind of there to see. But yeah, that's how it's done.
And when these camps aren't going ahead, obviously they're not happening continuously, and you are kind of in the STF program, is that when you in those gaps in between those retreats and stuff, that's where you're doing the labor trafficking, that's where you're going and witnessing on the streets or raising money through there was a woman in Liverpool that sells fake roses, and I'm sure that's a Unification Church thing. I've never asked her what she's selling the roses for, but I'm sure I read somewhere that's one of the things that the church might sell.
Selling flowers is big. Like I know how to make and wrap a bouquet because I grew up in the Unification Church. At a fast pace, like selling flowers on the corners street corners during holidays like Valentine's or Mother's Day, you make a lot of money that way. That's what some church members, that's what their careers became after years of labor trafficking, and they're raising their kids on being door-to-door salesmen. A lot of church members, that's their careers. Like if they had a resume, it would just be that.
Well, I guess some of it is transferable skills, isn't it? If you wanted to go and be a florist, you'd already be ahead of where I would be if I wanted to be a florist.
Oh, great perk. Yeah. Sorry, I said that sarcastically. It's like a one-way ticket to being a florist. Yeah. Who has some very crazy ideas about the world and free.
And
Yeah.
then you have to go and sell these things to people on the street. And I always wonder how. I spoke to a lady called Helen Zuman about her time on Zendik Farm, and she would go out and sell things, and there was a lot of pressure to come back with money. It sounds very similar to the Unification Church in the fact that if you didn't sell enough, you'd be sleeping in the van, and
Mhm.
and that's just such a daunting prospect to even imagine. So how do you go up to somebody and say, "Give me your money for this"? Like, how? No wonder you have a little bit of social anxiety. Like, I don't know how you could do that.
You just, I don't know. You just, I think the fact that you do it with a team makes it feel like it's this group effort. And whenever you come back into the van, you do a report. Like you report like what, how much you made, or well, you write down in a binder like how much you made, at least at the time, and you report about your experience. Um, yeah, so to the central figure, they call it, the person driving the van, who's the project manager of everything, basically dropping off everyone on the street, which is really dangerous. And anyway, but like, yeah, so there was that motivation that you're not alone, and yeah, I think you after you do it a few times, you just check out kind of. That's what I would do. I would just check out and be like, yeah, mentally, and just walk up to people and be like, hey, like, just a plastic smile. It was really, I mean, I probably have years more of therapy. Like sometimes I'm just awake in bed at night thinking about like how much it changed me, like how much it gutted out just my autonomy or like my just peace of mind. And it made me this very anxious, kind of overly ambitious without reason, like person who has to prove himself constantly. So you just repetition, repetition, you just follow, you get into it and you become that thing, it just becomes normal.
And during the time of your of this STF and also I guess throughout your whole life, are you restricted in any way in terms of like how much sleep you're getting, your diet? Are you encouraged to eat a certain way during your time in the church?
I feel like by the time I did STF, that was in the mid 90s, like 96 through like 98. Um, yeah, no, I feel like at least I didn't notice that those tactics were consciously being used, but we did have to wake up early as if we were going to school or something. Yeah. And then there was just like prayer in the morning or whatever, it's like being in church every day, basically. And then there was a lot of time to just like talk with other church members and stuff like that. But yeah, I didn't consciously notice that there was like changes in diets or like active sleep deprivation. I just thought that it was normal to wake up that early as an adult. But maybe there was something consciously there. I don't know.
And what about sort of sexuality? When you're growing up, were you ever encouraged to date anyone else in the Unification Church? Did you ever want to? What did that look like for you?
It was just a complete severance. Like you just don't even think about it. Like they were really hardcore about like they said something like in lectures like don't fall, because like the fall of man meant like having an illicit sexual relationship, or just doing the active sex. So like it was weird. Some guys were flirty, and it was just all these like passive aggressive ways of, being like that. I grew up in like the core, right near the moon. So to me, that was this heavy thing that I had to carry with me. But some people who grew up further, like they were smarter, they were more street smart about it. And some people had sex and they were like, what? It's not a big deal. And I'm like, oh my God, I envy you. Like you have a healthy sense of, autonomy or whatever in that department. So yeah, to me, it was like in my family, yeah, it was a big no-no. And I just made friends with girls in high school. I guess that was like the best I could get. So, and I'm still friends with them to this day. So, I mean, that's nice, but still it's a lot of unlearning. Yeah.
So you had to wait until you kind of left the church officially before you explored sort of that aspect of social life.
Yeah. And just a lot of talks with friends in college and stuff who were just like, luckily, like one or two of them were like on a mission to like really school me. Like they really caught the signal of like, wow, this guy really needs to learn a lot. And they were like, look, I know that you want to like fall in love. Like everyone wants to be in that like solid relationship. And like, but you know, you can't just start off like that. That's so like, so it's funny. Like in the
Yeah.
church, yeah, in the church, they used this example, like where they were like, you know, if you were going to buy a car, would you want to buy a used car or a new car? You know, and then like one of my friends, when I told him that, he was like, do you want someone who knows how to drive or not to drive the car?
That's such a good analogy. That's
Yeah.
so good. It's almost like you know, I can't afford a new car. I'd like a used car if I know it's reliable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
so
right.
good. Would you like a driver that has a license and some experience, or do you just want to go with somebody that's never sat behind the wheel of a car? That's so good. I love that.
Yeah, yeah. But it's a whole different philosophy. You know, the whole blood lineage thing of like, you know, you have pure blood now, so you know that's the thing that you have to kind of get around. I think
Mm-hmm.
the first cracks into that philosophy was like someone was telling me is like, oh yeah, a lot of religions have that. They all think they have the pure blood, and I'm like, really? I
Yeah,
thought it was what we do.
and they all think they have the true answer,
Yep.
and they all think that their movement or their godhead is the one. And I wouldn't say it's a joke, but I always speculate with people I'm speaking to about whether maybe he is the one, and the day will come where we're like, oh no, we really should have listened. But then
That's funny.
again, maybe it's Jehovah. Who's to say who the real one is, if there is one at all. But so you never married in the Unification Church. You never had an arranged marriage.
No, I think my family when we moved to Seattle, my whole family it was just a slow fade out away from the church. And my parents told me we officially left more or less when I was maybe like 17, 18. Is actually right after STF. And that hit me like a ton of bricks because I was kind of back into it after STF. And I was like, what? And I was kind of mad at them for like just handling it that way. But I think maybe they felt like they needed to because I was so charged up on the church all of a sudden again. They were like, uh-oh. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And
Right.
how long after that did Moon die, or were you still in the church when that happened?
Um, he he died in 2012, and
Yeah.
my parents kind of had that talk with me maybe in 97,
Oh,
98.
okay. So way before, way before.
Mhm.
And what was the reaction from you and your family at that point when the news of him dying is kind of made public?
I don't know. We didn't talk about it too much. We just kind of, yeah, we had gotten our distance from it. Still socially, we're kind of tied to it. But even our friends who grew up in the Moonies too, like we don't talk about it. So it's just kind of like a circumstantial connection with these people now.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of feelings. I don't know how my parents felt. We kind of don't talk about the church so much because the thing is like they still place so much emphasis on it as like, you know, and I understand like it's a place where they have all these precious memories with people and they went through trials, and when you go through trials with people you grow really close to them, you become a strong community. So I get that, but I don't like to venture in it because like they talk to me about the things that they feel like so deeply connected to while they were away from raising us. Like our family
Mm-hmm.
was secondary to that. So it's kind of painful. It's like, and it makes me mad. I'm just like, I don't want to hear about that. Like, you know, like that's supposed to be for your kids, you know, like, cool. But, you know, but then every now and then they'll slip in some like scandalous story. And I'm like, oh, and I just casually like, huh, oh, tell me more. That's interesting. And then I'm like, yes.
They're
And
probably
then
like the same, you know, it's just like got the salad and they're like, oh, I don't know if you heard, but and then you're casually like, oh, really? And then inside they're like, yeah, let me tell you more. And then you're probably just all really excited and giddy to dish.
No, for their own good sometimes. Like I'll just blow up about something if it's really blasphemous. Like there was this one church leader who kept a list of families who she knew they got inheritance money. And so she knew who to tap for like donations, that she
Oh,
called them donations. Basically, yeah, she knew who to swindle and to religiously guilt out of their family money, and they would give it to her. So, and I just blew up. I just slammed my fist on the table. I was like, "That's disgusting!" And they were like, "All right, we won't talk about it, or you're gonna get mad." But then, like a year later, my mom was like, "You're right. Like she was wrong."
yep,
You know?
yep. That was actually going to be my next question about the financial contributions that are expected of kind of UC members.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just by any means necessary. Yeah, if like labor trafficking, and then they'll ask for donations, like for any kind of new project. And I actually, so here's another interesting thing. Like I know someone who, I'll keep them anonymous, but what they told me was that like they were still kind of active in the church, but not really. Like they were checked out, but I think because their family was in the church, like they still stayed involved. But so there was this so Vegas is like this new kind of center for the church, where there's like billboards about the moons now, and you do want to start a true family, follow these guys. It's like really culty.
Oh,
And
in the city of sin as well, of all places.
yeah, because the moons like to gamble, and they're like, then they just, and church members talk about it like it's normal. That's how deep like these people are indoctrinated. So like, yeah, so they were opening up this church center there. There's supposed to be like this school where you learn about the principle or whatever like that. And they asked for donations from all the American families. They said like, I think it was like $2,500 per family. And church families are already pretty poor, but this is just routine for them. And apparently, one of the church leaders told this person that I know, who then told me, like, actually, we don't really need the money in the church. It's just that in Korea and Japan, like they're more loyal to the church. There's more of a longer history of it there, so there's more loyalty. And in America, like people are more kind of hesitant to donate. They're more kind of individual investments, even culturally, are like considered a little bit more, I think. There's not as much of a team kind of mentality. So this was just a way to stimulate. This is like kind of, I guess, would a red herring be? It was bait. Yeah, it was a bait to stimulate their habit of donating to the church more. And really it just went to overhead. So
Yeah, that's awful, especially when you consider that, again, going back to the amount of money that's been speculated to have been spent on parties and drugs and strippers and gambling and firearms and drug fueled parties and orgies and all sorts of things that have been that the children of Sun Myung Moon have been accused of entertaining. But one thing you did mention in your article, "Extremism is a Team Sport," was the holy songs that are sung in the Unification Church. And I just wanted to know, is there like a song book? Is there a hymn book? Where did the songs come from? Are they rewritten versions of old Christian songs? Or are they written by Sun Myung Moon? Like, where did they come from?
I'm not sure, actually. I think some of them are old Christian hymns. I remember I heard one of the songs on someone had a Christian station at a store or something. I was like, oh, I recognize that. Like, oh, I guess, yeah. So I think they're just taken from old Christian songs. Some of them might be Korean translated. Like they talk a lot about the fatherland, or the father shall, save us all, or something. I can't say for sure, honestly. But we had a holy songbook. That was like the more precious songbook that we said before prayer, and had like this illustration of like a, beautiful tree on it or whatever. And then there was like the other songbook, which was more just to kind of warm up to, I don't know, before a meeting or whatever. And in that songbook, we had like these songs taken from John Denver and the Beatles and Bob Dylan, and they changed the lyrics to make them more holy. Like, for example, 8 days a week, it was like, love you every day, Lord. Guess you know it's true. Yeah, it's not awful. Like, it made me like not like the Beatles for a long time. And then I started to explore their albums And I was like, okay, there's other stuff, and like it's enough to push away my bad memories of these manipulated songs. Even the songs get brainwashed. Anyway.
You've repeatedly used the term Moonies throughout our chat today, and I know it's something that you kind of a term that you use in other interviews as well. So for some people, it's offensive.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you, obviously you're not a part of the church anymore, and you use the word freely, but how do you view it?
The way I describe it is like as like a cultural like reference. I think more people know what Moonies is than Unification Church, which sounds very vague. So yeah, I use it like that, kind of tongue in cheek, but I would never say it in like a hateful manner, like, "Oh, you Mooney," like, you know. So I just use it as like kind of a reference, just because, yeah, just for that reason. But yeah, I don't mean to be derogatory. Like if I actually was talking to someone who's still in the Unification Church, I wouldn't say it. So again, yeah, it's just reference. I'm not trying to insult anyone, or, becoming a Mooney or Unification Church member. Like it happened to people. Like it's not something they consciously chose. I feel like maybe more or less, at least for a majority of them. So yeah, I wouldn't want to put that on them like that. So
Yeah, I think that's absolutely understandable. I think my partner went to school with a Mooney, and it was only when I used that term that he was like, "Oh, I went to school with somebody who was a Mooney." And so I was because I was going Unification Church, la 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 Mooney, and he was like, "Oh, okay." So I think in that sense, and then straight away, as soon as you say that word, what comes to mind is just like this sea of white wedding gowns.
yeah.
When somebody says that word to me, it's like the red carpets and interior, and then the white sea of just brides, which is such an iconic image, I think, which is obviously heavily associated with the church.
One thing I've learned over the years, just from talking to other people who grew up in the church, like online, is that Europe, I think maybe because they're further from the moons, like they're a lot more casual. It seems like to them, they're more like casual Moonies, but in America, it's more intense because it was like, it has the more world power, or I don't know, it's got the conservative like concentration, and there's all these freedom of religion protections. And so I think Moon really concentrated his efforts there, and it's more intense there. So that, yeah, in Europe it's a little more chill. So like if you ever meet someone who grew up in the Moonies or whatever, they might not talk about it the way I do.
Interestingly enough, though, my partner's mum did describe the parents of the two children that my partner went to school with. She said, "Oh yeah, their mum was quite a hippie." So I think that's quite an interesting parallel to draw. So how did your parents left the church and they kind of pulled you out of it? Is that how it worked? You and your siblings as well?
Yeah, they left, and my sister had also done the STF program. So we just got hit with like cognitive dissonance real hard. We just fell into this abyss of like, I don't know what, like, this is what our whole family's identity is based on. And so, yeah, that was hard for a few years. But I imagine what you were going to follow up with was like, when did you decide to leave the church, right? Or
Yeah, and sort of what has your life been like since? How have you what has your journey looked like to then and now?
okay. Well, so I was kind of, again, like my whole childhood was in the church. It was my closest childhood friends, like, were all in the church. I didn't really have many friends beyond that. So to me, it's like I didn't really want it at the time. I didn't want to leave, I guess, to that extent. I was okay with leaving all the boring rituals and but anyway. So for me, like the nail in the coffin was when one of Sun Myung Moon's sons committed suicide. His name was Youngjin, Philip Moon, and he was actually one of the kindest of the Moon kids. Somehow that toxicity didn't hit him as hard, and he didn't treat people like toys and bully the local church kids like his brother Sean Moon or Hyungjin, who runs that gun cult now, did. Uh, you hear any story about him from kids who knew him as kids, and it's like he was an asshole. Like, sorry, I don't know if I can curse, but like,
Yeah, you use whatever language you want.
yeah. So he just was. He's total. Just anyway, just watch his videos and you'll know. But his brother was like nicer, and they were always side by side going to church properties and stuff. And so I always saw them, and I always knew that Philip Moon to be the nicer one. So that guy eventually committed suicide, and the church sent out an email, and they blamed all the church members for his death. They were like, "You didn't have enough faith, and you made this happen." And I was just like so disgusted again, because I know this guy, that I was like, there's no moment of silence. There's no like talking about him as a person. And it was so disgusting. I just left.
I remember receiving a letter from a former member who spoke to me about his experience with that when that happened. And he mentioned that his entire childhood and growing up in the church and leaving the church was surrounded by people completing suicide just everywhere he went, just Unification church members. He said that there were, just almost double figures he could think of, people that had taken their lives from being involved in the church. And I just thought that was so horribly tragic. It was that same person that you just mentioned that was the final straw for him as well. And he just said, wow. No, I just don't want to be part of this anymore.
Huh. Can I ask which country that was in?
English was not his first language. Okay. So he never disclosed his name or where he was talking to me from. He might well have still been in America. I think he actually did mention that he was quite close to him.
Oh wow. Huh.
But yeah, he wrote to me. It's on a previous episode quite a while back. I read his testimony out on his behalf because he wanted to stay anonymous. But he spoke about the loss of life through the completion of suicide in the Unification Church, and it just seemed excessive, even more so than the average rates of suicide within sort of typical general public.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of 4, and then I know that a lot of especially the LGBTQ kids have all either attempted or had suicidal ideation, maybe all of them, it was that cruel to them. So yeah, I believe it. Yeah, but yeah, I can think of four situations.
It's just,
yeah.
There's just enough stuff involved in this movement without all of that extra heartache and tragedy on top of it as well. And you wonder what experiences these people must be enduring for that to be the only option, or they feel like is the only option left for them. Especially the son as a direct member. Maybe he was just one of the people that was like, I cannot live in such a hypocritical, evil, tyrannical environment. And what do you do? Do you run away? Can he speak against his parents? Is he in danger? If he does, you just don't know.
Yeah. It's there's a term, self-denial. That's another big term in the Unification Church, and another big slogan is "Live for the sake of others." So to satiate or to fulfill any personal desires is seen as selfish, and I think that might be a common cult thing. So you enter the world as an adult, and you just you don't really know, you don't know how to trust your own compass, so it's tough. I think I've met other people who are in ambitious careers and they're successful, and on the surface they look like they're living the dream, but they're not really happy. They just had to prove themselves, and do something grandiose in their career. And I mean, I think that's the story of a lot of people who maybe come from hardship, but yeah, I think just not being there for yourself is like is a big piece that's missing, and something that's conditioned away from us growing up in the Moonies, but also growing up in dysfunctional families or families with a history of mental illness, who maybe the parents joined because they didn't find a community, or there wasn't a community of people who had depression or things like that, and then that's where groups like this come in, and maybe it's really positive in a lot of ways. I often describe the Unification Church like medication. It's like it can help you get on your feet and get going, but if you get too much of it, it can be addictive and pull you away from reality. So that's kind of how I see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've just looked here through my threads. So I think I did an interview with a lady called Jane about the Unification Church, and I think I read the testimony at the end of that episode. So for anyone that wanted to go back and listen to that, that was episode 45. So what advice would you give to people who are looking to leave the Unification Church or high controlling groups in general?
I would say, you can't just leave and then become normal. Like, you have to find something to replace it. So community is, I think, the biggest thing that keeps people in the church. And, I appreciate that. I grew up in an international community. I'm glad, it takes a village, and the church was my village. So that part I think is okay. But, at the same time, of course, it was a lot of holes in it, but at least there were people. So, find out what you're interested in. For me, I went to art school, and I was like, this is where I'm going to build my new community, my new trust circle. And like, I joined a band in college, and now I'm really close with those guys still. I kind of knew that I had to reinvent myself. So there's that, just finding support and community and other people. You got to be patient with yourself. You can't be like, why don't I, become friends with or why don't I trust people right away? It's like, well, because you were taught not to trust the world. And, therapy, of course, is really important. If you just Google ex-cult therapy or ex-cult therapists, I never planned on going to an ex-cult therapist. I just went to different therapists, and like, none of them really were great. I had maybe 3 or 4. But then I read a book that I saw on this cult website or something called Take Back Your Life by Janja Lalich and Madeline Tobias. And so on this website, it was like, if there was one book you could read like after being in a cult, like this would be it. And it did. It spoke to so many of the conditions that I didn't know had names that I had experienced. And like PTSD, I was like, wow, I kind of have PTSD. Yeah. So when I got to know the area better of like, this is what the therapists know if you're going to go into it, that's when I was like, I'm going to go into it. It's not like I just stepped into therapy because a friend recommended. Like, I knew what I was getting into. So yeah, do a little research, get to know that world. And I think one of the biggest things about leaving a cult is that you think all other groups are cults, because that's your experience of what a group is. Like, you have to give everything to it, and you can't be you. So that helped to like know who I was like dealing with. Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is rebuilding, isn't it? I one question I did want to ask, are there any resources particularly that you would recommend for people coming out of movements that they've been born into? Because I feel like there's a lack of resources available for children and adults who have grown up in these movements and not just been a part of them for a number of years once they'd reached adulthood.
Yeah, me too. There's no like central place. I've thought about it, but I'm like, I don't know if I want to manage it. I have my own efforts that I do. So in my own time and space, and if you'd like to know more about them, you can just contact me, teddyhosworks@gmail.com. That's, I can just maybe refer you to something. But yeah, there's no central place. That I know on Reddit there's a few groups. Um, yeah, Reddit seems to be the place where you can find any community. Maybe on Facebook, there's like a cult survivors network. I know Steve Hassan helps run that, and Chris Shelton, I think his name is Scientology. Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I don't know. Yeah, again, there's like there's no second generation one that I know of, and there
No.
actually yeah, there's a website that just came out. Maybe it'll spring from it called igotout.org, I think. Yeah, maybe you've heard of it. Sarah Edmondson, I think is her name. Like
Hmm.
she did like a trailer video of like what the site's about. So that's where ex-cult members can go and tell their stories. So that's nice that that's around. Yeah. That's probably the best.
Awesome. So I think also to mention that there is your website, teddyhose.com as well. And for
Yeah.
anybody that wanted to go and watch some more of Teddy's stuff, then there is the A&E documentary Cults and Extreme Beliefs, which is amazing. Everybody should go and watch it. And then again, there is the explained episode. And the only reason I keep going back to that is because if you don't have a Netflix subscription, it is available on YouTube as well. The full episode you can go and watch on YouTube. So I guess all that's left to say is thank you so much for coming and giving me all of these things to reflect on that I hadn't even heard of before. I can't wait to go and to tell my partner about semen in the in the Kool-Aid, so to speak. And yeah, I think it's just incredible to be able to sit here with you and listen to your story, and then you talk about also, you know, being a writer, being an artist, doing motion graphics, you know, in New York. You've just moved back there, and that just sounds like what a turnaround. You know, we've spoken about the tragedy of some people taking their lives, and here you are speaking out against the church, being an advocate and a voice for other people that have suffered this same similar experiences. You know, other people that find themselves in high controlling groups, and you're just here building up all of these resources for people to be able to go away, understand a little bit more, do a little bit of research like you've just recommended. And I just think that's so commendable. And I was so excited to talk to you this evening. And I'm just so thankful for your time, Teddy. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. This has been really great. Like I really appreciate that. And yeah, I just any opportunity for me to speak on the platforms like this, like I really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be talking about this now. Yeah, publicly.
Thank you so much, Teddy. I'll speak to you soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Have a good night.
Thanks. Bye. That is the end of this week's episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can do so by emailing me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or find me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I am your speaker, Casey, and this has been the Cult Vault.